His breath hitched. I saw it. He stood there, backlit by the afternoon sun slicing through the blinds, frozen with his hand still resting on the fridge door, half closed. The silence between us had become unbearable, electric, dangerous, real. I held the edge of the counter, knuckles white, heart a hummingbird inside my chest. The room around us blurred, like the rest of the world had collapsed into this kitchen and this moment. I shouldn't be here, I whispered. He didn't move. But something in his eyes did. A shift. A recognition. I know, he said, barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. We stood 5 feet apart. Then 4. Then 2. The world narrowed, and the scent of roasted coffee beans from the cabinet above me clashed with the smell of freshly cut grass on his shirt. 1 more inch and gravity might have decided everything for us. And then, footsteps outside. Loud. Real. The front door creaked. We jumped apart like strangers. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question. Do you agree that everyone deserves a second chance after cheating? It was 2 days before Thanksgiving when everything started to shift. I remember because I was decorating the porch with faux pumpkins from HomeGoods and a worn-out wreath I'd been using since the twins graduated high school. My husband was out of town again, Milwaukee this time, for another sales expo. He'd left behind a half-drunk mug of cold coffee, 2 crumpled dress shirts on the bed, and his usual trail of absence. That morning, the guest room door opened. He stepped out barefoot, rubbing the back of his neck and offering a groggy morning. I nodded and smiled like I always do, the one that doesn't reach my eyes. He looked older than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, tattoos peeking out of a gray college tee. My husband's son from a previous marriage, someone I'd only seen in Christmas pictures for most of the last decade, was now standing in my hallway like part of the furniture. The arrangement was temporary, just until he found a place. That's what my husband said when he called 3 days ago. Just let him crash in the spare room. He's a good kid. Except he wasn't a kid. Not anymore. He poured himself coffee like he knew the kitchen better than I did. Hope it's okay I started the pot, he said. I nodded again. That seemed to be the only thing I did lately. Nod. Smile. Host. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that the air started feeling different. Maybe it was when I caught him adjusting the porch lights, climbing a ladder with that confidence people get when they've done something 100 times. Maybe it was the way he asked questions that weren't small talk. You always decorate alone, he asked, handing me another pack of LED strings. Yes, I said. No explanation. Just yes. That night, the house was too quiet. I couldn't focus on the Hallmark movie playing in the background. The turkey checklist sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. I found myself hovering outside the guest room, listening for movement. None came. The next day, I got up early and found him already dressed, hair still damp from a shower, scrolling through his phone in the kitchen. You don't sleep much either, huh, he said. I almost told him the truth. That I hadn't slept through a night in years. That the silence in my marriage wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. Instead, I made coffee. Later, I suggested Target. A drive. I need table runners. And napkins. And space, I wanted to say, but didn't. He offered to come along. We drove with the windows cracked, cool autumn air swirling through the car. He played music, something folksy and unfamiliar but comforting. We talked about trivial things, turkey brining, why seasonal displays go up earlier every year, how small towns never change. Inside Target, something unspoken lingered between us. It wasn't flirtation. Not yet. It was proximity. his shoulder too close as we reached for matching placemats. His voice lower when he asked, "What's your favorite part of Thanksgiving?" "Quiet," I said. That made him pause. He looked at me differently then. Not like his father's wife. Not like a step anything. Just a woman standing in a red aisle with a shopping cart full of distractions. We left with more than we planned: new mugs, cinnamon-scented candles, peppermint bark I didn't even like. On the drive back, the silence changed. It wasn't empty. It was full. That night, he knocked on my doorframe while I was rearranging the mantel. "Hey," he said, like we were in a different rhythm now. "Movie?" I hesitated, but only for a second. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, watching When Harry Met Sally. Halfway through, he quoted a line. I laughed. He grinned. Something inside me stirred, familiar and foreign at once. When the credits rolled, I realized I hadn't looked at my phone in hours. I hadn't thought of the conference calls or the spreadsheets or even the face of the man I married. He stood, stretched, and walked to the kitchen. I followed without thinking. "I always liked that movie," I said, leaning against the fridge. "Yeah," he said, opening it for a soda. "Guess we all want a story like that." "But they were just friends," I replied. He looked at me for a long second. "Were they?" I didn't know what to say. He closed the fridge. The door clicked softly. He turned toward me, steps slow, deliberate. I could feel the tension like it was stitched into the air between us. And then I noticed it. His toothbrush. It was on the bathroom counter next to mine. Not in a drawer. Not in his travel bag. Out in the open. Like it belonged there. I didn't remember putting it there. I didn't remember allowing this shift. But there it was. And for the first time in years, I felt something move inside me that wasn't fear. It was worse. It was temptation. It was the start of something I didn't think I was capable of. But I was wrong. I couldn't stop staring at that toothbrush. It was bright blue, resting right next to mine like it had always belonged there. I didn't remember placing it. Didn't recall giving permission. But it was there. Quiet, casual, permanent. The kind of detail you miss when life speeds up, until it doesn't. I left the bathroom and walked down the hallway, the wooden floor creaking under my socks. He was in the kitchen again, barefoot, holding an apple like he had nothing else to do in this world. There was something jarring about the ease in his posture, the way he leaned against the counter like he owned time. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. The house had a strange stillness, the kind that makes every sound louder. I grabbed my keys. "Target," I said. He looked up. "You want company?" I hesitated. That pause was loud too. "Sure." We got into my car, the beige Subaru I'd had since the twins went off to college. The weather had shifted overnight, thin fog clung to the streets like it didn't want to let go. He adjusted the seat without asking, set his coffee cup in the holder, and fiddled with the radio until soft folk music started humming through the speakers. I didn't stop him. It felt strangely natural. Too natural. We drove in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The knowing kind. As if every streetlight we passed held its breath for us. Inside Target, everything looked aggressively red and green. Christmas had arrived early, like it always did. I pushed the cart while he picked out cinnamon-scented candles and made sarcastic comments about how capitalism ruins holidays. I laughed more than I should have. People brushed past us in heavy coats. We looked like any other pair. No one could tell we weren't supposed to feel like this. He handed me a box of peppermint bark. "You like these?" he asked. Not really. He dropped them in the cart anyway. We reached the home section, and I stared at rows of table runners, unsure which shade of burgundy matched the dishes I hadn't used in years. He held up two options, one traditional, one patterned with snowflakes, and made a dramatic presentation like a game show host. I rolled my eyes and pointed at the plain one. As we headed toward the checkout, he added a pair of plain black gloves to the cart. My hands freeze on morning runs, he said. You've only been here 3 days. Planning ahead. Outside, the parking lot was half empty. The sky had darkened, early for that hour. Clouds stretched thick and low. He loaded the bags into the trunk while I sat behind the wheel, suddenly unsure why I'd brought him with me. Or why I'd enjoyed it. The ride home was quieter. The music had stopped. Neither of us bothered to turn it back on. We passed the library, the local bakery, the community center with its faded yellow sign. Then he spoke. I didn't expect it to feel this easy. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. We shouldn't talk about that, I said. He looked out the window. Okay. But it was already out. Spoken. Real. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw the cardboard box before we even stepped out. It was sitting on the porch, glossy, white, and tied with a ribbon. I recognized the packaging immediately. Victoria's Secret. My name was written on the front in my husband's handwriting. I picked it up slowly, heart pounding in my ears. He stood behind me, silent. Inside, I found a folded set of winter pajamas, red and green flannel, classic holiday pattern. A note was tucked under the collar. Thought of you. Can't wait to be home. Love you. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't remember the last time my husband bought me anything that wasn't practical. He hadn't brought me flowers in months. But now, when I had just enjoyed someone else's attention more than I was ready to admit, he thought of me. I walked inside, set the box on the dining table, and didn't touch it again. Later that evening, we watched TV in the living room. Something forgettable played in the background. He sat at the far end of the couch again, feet tucked under himself. I focused on the flicker of the fireplace, on anything that wasn't him. But the energy had changed. I stood and moved to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. He followed. We stood there for a long moment. The overhead lights were dim, casting soft shadows. He leaned on the fridge again, same spot, same silence. He didn't touch me. I didn't touch him. But we kissed. It was brief. It was wrong. It was inevitable. And then, nothing. He stepped back. I turned away. My pulse thundered in my throat. There were no words. There didn't need to be. The moment cracked the shell of everything I'd been pretending not to feel. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in the guest room after he went to bed. Sat on the edge of the unused twin bed, wrapped in a throw blanket, listening to the wind push against the windows. I replayed the day over and over again. Not the kiss. The quiet. And the toothbrush. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to grab coffee, and he was already there, pouring cereal like he hadn't turned my life sideways. He smiled softly, offered me the first cup from the pot. We didn't speak about what happened. We didn't need to. The silence said enough. I went outside to grab the newspaper, habit, even though I mostly read headlines on my phone now, and as I reached for it, I noticed something else on the porch. A second package. This time, no ribbon. No name. Inside, a sleek white box with a return address from Chicago. I opened it cautiously, hard in my throat. It was a brand new electric toothbrush. The same bright blue. Same brand. Same model. I turned slowly, stared back at the house. There had only ever been one. Until now. I stood at the porch with the second toothbrush in my hand, the packaging too pristine, the timing too exact. I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just a coincidence. Nothing about this had been coincidence since the day he walked through our front door. I brought the box inside and placed it next to the first one on the bathroom counter. Both identical. Both blue. I stared at them like they might explain themselves. But they didn't. The house felt different that morning. It was Sunday. Wind scraped the windows, and the sky was heavy with clouds. I watched him through the kitchen window. He was outside raking the last leaves from the yard, sleeves pushed up, focused. Moving like he needed something to do with his hands. He looked like he belonged there. I couldn't stay inside anymore. I grabbed my coat and stepped out onto the porch. The air slapped me awake. He looked up and said nothing, but the rake slowed in his hands. He rested it against the tree and walked toward me without a word. For a long moment, we just stood there, watching the wind toss the branches around. I need to go for a walk, I said. Away from the house. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded. We left the rake behind. We walked down the neighborhood path behind the cul-de-sac, the one that looped behind the school and ended at the little city park no one ever really used in the winter. The gravel crunched beneath our feet. No one else was out. Only the wind, the rustle of dry trees, and the two of us, carrying something that neither of us had the courage to name. He broke the silence first. You've been quiet. I don't know what to say. That's okay. But it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. We sat on a bench near the duck pond, the water murky and still. I didn't look at him. My fingers traced the worn wooden slats beneath me, searching for splinters, for anything real. I feel like I'm living in a story that doesn't belong to me, I said. I know the feeling, he replied. There was no apology. No justification. Just that. Understanding. When we got back to the house, the day had already begun to dim. The clouds had thickened. I made tea without asking if he wanted any. He took the second mug like it had been his all along. We spent most of the afternoon in separate rooms, but the house was small enough that I could still feel him every footstep, every door creak, every faucet. And then, around 5, I heard him in the hallway. He stood at the doorway of the room where I was folding laundry. I'm heading out for a bit, he said. Where? Just out. He left before I could answer. The door clicked shut behind him. A gust of cold air swept through the hallway. I stood there for several minutes, unmoving, the basket of laundry untouched. My fingers dug into a pile of towels that no longer smelled like home. I needed air. I grabbed my coat again, locked the door behind me, and walked. I didn't know where I was going until I ended up at the local bookstore. A small, quiet place with a coffee bar in the back and rows of used fiction. The owner, a woman named Margie, greeted me with a nod. I wandered through the aisles like I was chasing something invisible. I picked up a book I didn't need and bought it anyway. On the way out, I nearly bumped into him. He was walking in as I was walking out. Neither of us said anything at first. Just stared. Then I said, "You said you were heading out." He looked at the book bag in my hand. So did you. We ended up walking together again, this time with no clear destination. The streets were quiet. The Christmas lights had started going up around the neighborhood, plastic reindeer in yards, wreaths on garage doors, strings of lights fighting against the early dark. We turned a corner onto an unfamiliar block. At the edge of it was an old community center, long since closed for renovation. The windows were papered over, the playground behind it half torn down. He stopped in front of the fence. I used to come here when I was a kid. Back when it was still open. They had these awful crafts on Saturdays and pancakes that tasted like rubber. I leaned against the fence post. I remember this place too, I said. Your dad brought me here once. Years ago. It hit us both at the same time. That our lives had once crossed in ways we never noticed. We turned toward each other. And we kissed. There were no words after. We walked back to the house in silence, the kiss still echoing between us, trailing behind like fog. When we got home, the porch light flickered once and went out. The hallway was dark. I moved toward the kitchen, needing something, water, distraction, distance. But I stopped in the doorway. On the dining table sat a takeout bag from the Italian place down the street. The one I liked. The one my husband never remembered the name of. Inside the bag was a container of spinach ravioli and a receipt with a timestamp from 15 minutes ago. He saw it too. I didn't order this, he said. I didn't either. I checked the bag again. Under the receipt was a note, scribbled on the back of a napkin in familiar handwriting. For when I get back. I hope it still tastes the same. There was no name. Just the handwriting. And I knew. My husband had been here. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen long after the ravioli had gone cold, after he'd gone to bed. The lights were dim, the house silent, but my thoughts were loud. The napkin lay on the counter, folded and unfolded a dozen times. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, rushed, slightly slanted to the right. I'd seen it on birthday cards, grocery lists, and sticky notes on the bathroom mirror for years. He'd been here. Not hours ago. Minutes. 15, maybe 20 at most. He knew we were home. He must have seen the cars. He must have heard the steps inside. And still, he left a note. For me? For him? For both of us? The next morning, everything changed. The wind had picked up overnight, and the snow came early. Not the romantic kind, but the heavy, wet kind that coated everything in silence and slush. I opened the curtains and saw the world outside buried under gray. Our street was quiet, no tire tracks, no kids playing, no sounds of shovels. Just the muted weight of winter arriving ahead of schedule. I checked the news, blizzard advisory. Power outages likely. Travel not recommended. He appeared behind me, rubbing his eyes, holding a blanket over his shoulders. Everything okay? He asked. Looks like we're stuck here. He nodded slowly, as if the weather had just confirmed something he'd already decided. We spent the morning prepping. I boiled water, filled pitchers. He brought in more firewood from the backyard shed, his boots soaked through. We pulled out candles from the holiday boxes in the basement. There was something almost absurd about setting up emergency lighting next to a Santa figurine. By noon, the power flickered. Then it died. Everything stopped. The fridge, the heating, the hum of the house is gone. It got quiet in a new way. We didn't panic. We just adjusted. I cooked on the gas stove, boxed mac and cheese, beans, scrambled eggs. He found an old battery-powered radio and tuned it until a local station crackled through. We sat at the kitchen table, layered in sweaters, listening to storm updates and old country songs. For a few hours, it felt like we were the only two people left on the planet. Late afternoon brought darkness faster than usual. The wind howled against the windows. He lit the candles. I pulled the curtains shut. Then we played cards. We sat on the floor in the living room, the fire giving off weak warmth, the room glowing amber. Uno, of all things. He joked, I laughed. We didn't talk about the note. We didn't talk about the kiss. We just existed in that strange pocket of time where nothing else seemed to matter. But it did matter. After the third round, he looked at me longer than he should have. The shadows on his face flickered with the flames. My breath caught for just a second. We spent night together. Morning came slowly. Pale, gray, and ice-cold. I woke up disoriented. The silence was thicker than before, as if the world outside had been erased. I reached for the sweater on the floor and moved through the hallway barefoot, cautious. He was already up, standing at the front window, arms crossed, staring out at something I couldn't see yet. I joined him. What is it? I asked. He pointed with his chin. Look. The driveway had fresh tire tracks in the snow. 2 lines. 1 vehicle. Not mine. I stared at them. They cut through the untouched snow like an accusation. Whoever drove in, did it after the snowfall. After the world went white. And then I saw it. Footprints leading from the edge of the driveway straight to our front door. My stomach dropped. No knock. No doorbell. No text. Just tracks and a silent exit. I opened the door. Cold wind punched through. The prints ended at the doormat. And on the mat was a grocery bag. I brought it inside. No note this time. Just 2 items. A bottle of my favorite wine, the one my husband never remembered, and a jar of his son's favorite peanut butter. Not the cheap kind. The exact one we'd laughed about weeks ago in the Target aisle. He hadn't just been here. He'd been listening. I turned to him. His jaw was tight. Eyes fixed on the bag. He knows, I whispered. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared. I placed the items on the table like they might detonate. Then I noticed something tucked beneath the wine bottle. A hotel key card in a paper sleeve. I flipped it over. On the back, scrawled in the same handwriting. Friday. Room 214. We should talk. Friday was tomorrow. I kept the hotel key card in the drawer next to the oven mitts. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know what else to do with it. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I felt its weight pressing through the wood like it was vibrating. Friday was tomorrow, and everything in the house felt sharper. Edges, glances, silences. The weather had cleared, but the cold stayed. I vacuumed rooms that didn't need cleaning. Rearranged the living room bookshelves. Refolded blankets that were already perfectly neat. The sound of him moving through the house was constant, his footsteps, his shifting weight in the hallway, the muffled creak of floorboards I used to only associate with my husband. And yet I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone for days. But I'd never felt more like I was balancing on the edge of something irreversible. That morning, the tension between us was visible. I made coffee, he poured his own. He reached for the cream just as I did. Our fingers brushed. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. There were entire conversations living inside our silence. Later, I stepped into the laundry room to switch out the dryer and heard the front door. A car door slammed. Then keys hit the table. He was home. My husband. I froze in place. He walked into the kitchen with a casual smile, scarf still around his neck, cheeks pink from the cold. Hey, he said like nothing was strange. Flight landed early. Figured I'd surprise you. I couldn't speak. Not yet. I just nodded and reached for the towel like I'd been wiping my hands. He noticed the stack of folded linens, the lit candles, the pantry stocked. "Looks like you've been nesting." I forced a laugh. The storm got to me. Then he turned toward the guest room. "He's still here?" I didn't breathe. "Yeah. In his room." He didn't go in. Just left his suitcase near the stairs, like he always did. That night, the three of us sat at the table. Dinner was quiet. I'd made pasta, something neutral, easy to fill space. My husband told stories about his meetings, the snow in Chicago, a coworker's mishap with a rental car. He laughed at his own jokes. We smiled where appropriate. Across from me, the guest kept his head down, chewing slower than usual, barely touching his drink. At one point, my husband looked between us and said, "You two been getting along all right?" There was a pause. I answered quickly. "Yeah. It's been fine." He smiled again. "Good. I always hoped you two would connect." After dinner, my husband took his suitcase upstairs and began unpacking. The sound of drawers opening, zippers, hangers sliding. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, frozen. He called down, "Don't forget to plug in the car. Battery's probably low from sitting all week." I nodded, grabbed the keys, and walked into the garage. The moment I stepped inside, he was already there. The guest. He stood next to the shelves, arms folded, eyes on me like he'd been waiting. "We need to talk," he said. "Not here." He didn't move. He knows. I felt it in my spine. No. He suspects. He left that key card on purpose. He wanted to see what you'd do with it. I stared at the garage wall, at the tools lined up perfectly, the quiet life I had arranged and maintained for years. None of it felt steady anymore. He walked past me and opened the door to the backyard. The cold hit us both. Out there, the wind had returned, brittle and biting. We stood beneath the bare tree near the patio. Christmas lights from other houses blinked through the distance. "What are we doing?" I asked. He didn't answer. "You said it yourself. This wasn't supposed to feel easy." Still, no answer. I looked at him. He looked at me. Then he said, "We kissed again." We kissed. I turned away first. I couldn't let the kiss stay in the cold. I couldn't let it be anything more than what it was. When I returned inside, my husband was in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine, the same bottle that had been delivered 2 days earlier. The cork sat beside him on the table. "You remembered this was my favorite," I said. He shrugged. "I never forgot." He studied me for a moment too long. Then, calmly, he said, "I have an idea." I stayed still. "Let's take a drive this weekend. Just us. Head up north. You haven't left town in months." My mind raced. Now? Tomorrow? My throat tightened. "You sure?" He smiled. "It's time we reconnected." I nodded slowly. Then he added, "Pack light." He walked upstairs. I stood in place, every joint stiff, every thought disjointed. 10 minutes later, I returned to the kitchen and saw the car keys on the table. Next to them was the hotel key card. Removed from the drawer. Out in the open. But it wasn't the same card. This one had a different room number. Different hotel logo. And underneath it, scribbled in the same handwriting. "You won't need this one either." I didn't sleep. Again. Not from guilt. Not from fear. From not knowing which version of my life was waiting for me the next time I opened a door. The hotel key card with the scribbled message was still on the kitchen table when I came downstairs. My husband was already gone, his scarf missing from the hook, his boots from the mat. He left no note. No text. Just silence. I stared at the new card. Different hotel, different room. You won't need this one either. He'd found the first. Left this one in its place. A message, but not a threat. More like a test. Or a line, carefully drawn to see which side I'd choose. I left it untouched. The house felt hollow that morning. No sounds from upstairs. No clinking dishes. He was still asleep, probably, or pretending to be. The light through the windows was cold and thin, stretching across the floor like something exhausted. I walked to the laundry room to start a load and noticed the back door slightly open. Just an inch. Not broken, not forced. Just ajar. Outside, the snow had begun to melt. I stepped out barefoot, just to feel something real. Then I saw it. My husband's car was parked at the edge of the driveway. He hadn't driven to town. He never left. He was here the entire time. I ran back inside, closed the door, locked it. My fingers shook slightly. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the counter. 2 mugs sat there. Only one had coffee. The other was dry, untouched. He had been watching again. Not confronting. Not asking. Just watching. And I didn't know what that meant anymore. By noon, I tried to distract myself. I baked. Not out of joy or habit, but necessity. Flour, eggs, sugar, measured distractions. The oven preheated, the kitchen warmed, the scent of something normal filled the air. He came downstairs mid-afternoon, still in the sweatshirt he wore the day before. Hair damp from a shower. He sat at the table like nothing had happened. I placed a slice of banana bread in front of him. He thanked me. We didn't speak for 10 minutes. Then, casually, he said, I went through the trunk of your car yesterday. Looking for the ice scraper. I said nothing. He kept eating. Didn't know we still had that old gym bag in there. My stomach tightened. He continued, you kept my college t-shirts. I forgot how many I had. Still, I said nothing. Then he smiled softly and added, there was one in there I didn't recognize, though. Must have been yours? I looked straight at him. Maybe. He nodded like that was enough. But it wasn't. That evening, we were invited to dinner by our neighbors. I had no interest in going, but my husband insisted. Said it would be good to get out. I couldn't tell if that was a suggestion or a tactic. Either way, we went. The house was loud with a football game on TV, kids running, casserole dishes being passed. Normalcy, weaponized. Everyone asked about our Thanksgiving plans. I lied without hesitation. Quiet. Just the 2 of us. Staying local this year. He reached for my hand under the table. Held it just enough to feel like a memory. When we got home, the house was too quiet again. I walked upstairs and paused outside the guest room. The door was cracked. Light off. I pushed it open. He was sitting on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall. I stepped inside. He knows, I said. He nodded. Why hasn't he said anything? He's waiting for you to. I sat on the edge of the bed, folded my hands. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. He didn't respond. I looked at him. Do you? He met my eyes. No. We sat in silence for a moment too long. Then I stood. I need some air. I grabbed my coat and left the house. The sky was dark. The streetlights hummed. I walked toward the edge of the block where the houses got further apart, where the road dipped slightly and the wind didn't feel like it was carrying someone's judgment. I sat on the bench near the retention pond. It was half frozen now, the surface cracking in slow patterns. Across the water, a single porch light flickered off and on. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn. My husband sat beside me. Slowly. Like we were just two people on a public bench. I almost took the bag out, he said. The one in the trunk? Yeah. But you didn't. No. I left it. I wanted to see if you'd move it. Or explain it. I didn't. I noticed. Silence stretched between us. I've been trying to remember the last time you looked at me, he said. Really looked. Like you used to. I said nothing. He continued, and then I realized. I stopped looking first. We both stared at the frozen water. Then he added, I'm leaving Monday. I turned toward him. Not because of this. Not because I'm angry. I just need to figure out if I want to be in a house where I don't feel seen anymore. He stood up. And without another word, walked back home. I stayed on the bench, frozen not by the wind, but by the understanding that he hadn't accused me. He hadn't punished me. He had simply chosen something I hadn't. When I returned an hour later, the living room was dark. Only one light remained on, in the laundry room. I walked in and stopped cold. His gym bag was open on the floor. Inside, neatly folded, my husband's t-shirts, a pair of running shoes, a shaving kit. And on top, carefully placed, the same blue t-shirt that didn't belong to him. Folded. Washed. Smelling of our detergent. He had packed the proof. And left it for me to find. I didn't touch the bag. I couldn't. I stood in the laundry room long enough for my knees to stiffen and my breath to grow shallow. The blue t-shirt sat there like a quiet accusation, clean, folded, placed with intention. There was no note this time. No scribbled words. Just action. A decision, made and left for me to find. I closed the lid slowly and stepped away like it might break open again. The next morning, he was gone. His scarf was back on the hook, the boots neatly aligned. But his gym bag was missing. No suitcase, no keys on the table. Only the faint smell of his aftershave lingering near the coat rack. On the kitchen counter, he'd left breakfast. Toast. Scrambled eggs. A folded napkin on a plate I didn't recognize. Not from our usual set. I didn't eat it. I poured myself coffee and stood at the window, staring at the driveway. The frost had melted. The trees were bare. The mailbox stood open. I walked out to check, more out of habit than hope, and found it empty. He had vanished with no confrontation, no explosion. Only the aftermath of knowing he had seen everything and chosen silence over spectacle. I spent the day moving through the house like a guest. Every room looked familiar but somehow no longer mine. I opened windows that didn't need air. Rearranged spices. Closed drawers that weren't open. I was restless, but there was nowhere to go. The house pulsed with questions I couldn't answer. He stayed in his room most of the day. I could hear him moving now and then, footsteps pacing, the soft murmur of his voice on a call, the brief rattle of a suitcase zipper. By evening, I knocked. He opened the door halfway. His eyes were tired, but steady. I need to get out of here, I said. He nodded. No questions. No hesitation. We left without jackets, without a plan. Just keys, wallets, and the weight of whatever this was between us. We drove toward the edge of town. Past the grocery store. Past the school. Past the diner that hadn't reopened since spring. The highway was nearly empty, the world outside dipped in soft twilight and distant headlights. I pulled into the parking lot of an old roadside cafe, the kind with chipped booths, mismatched mugs, and a flickering neon open sign that buzzed louder than the conversations inside. We sat in a corner booth. Ordered coffee neither of us really wanted. He didn't speak first. I did. I can't undo anything. But I can stop pretending none of it happened. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just listened. I don't know what happens next, I said. But I'm not walking back into that house pretending we're strangers. Still, he said nothing. When the check came, he grabbed it before I could. Left cash and slid out of the booth. I followed. Outside, the air was colder than it looked. We stood by the car for a few seconds, not getting in. The parking lot stretched out in quiet, framed by trees and power lines. He leaned against the passenger door. "You're not going back to him, are you?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. He already left. We kissed. The drive back was silent. Radio off. Windows cracked just enough for the cold to sneak in. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. I reached for the switch and stopped. There was a package by the door. Not from a courier. No label. No wrapping. A simple brown paper bag, folded at the top. I bent down slowly, picked it up, and carried it into the kitchen. He followed me in, his eyes locked on the bag the way someone watches a fuse burn. Inside was a single item. A t-shirt. Not the blue one. This one was white. Wrinkled. Worn. And it belonged to neither of them. I knew it immediately. My son's. Folded but not washed. Dusty around the collar. A faint scent of cedar clinging to it from the storage bin in the attic. I looked up. The air left the room. I hadn't opened that box in years. Hadn't touched any of his old things. And now it was here. But it wasn't about the shirt. It was about what came next. I turned toward him slowly. His face was blank. Pale. And then, from the hallway, I heard the front door open. Footsteps. And my husband's voice. I forgot something. His voice hit the room like a dropped glass. I forgot something. I froze in place, one hand still inside the paper bag, the other clutching the edge of the counter to stay upright. The white shirt was there, soft, old, unmistakably my son's from high school, from the years when the attic still mattered. I turned toward the hallway slowly, every second stretching longer than it had any right to. He stood there just inside the door, calm, composed, eyes flicking from me to the man standing next to me, and then to the brown bag on the table. No panic. No shouting. Just awareness. His coat was still on. He hadn't meant to stay. But something in the room changed that. He stepped forward once. Then again. I moved without thinking, straightening the bag, closing it, setting it aside like it would vanish if I just removed it from sight. It didn't. He walked up to the table and looked at the bag, not touching it. "That wasn't for you," I said quietly. "Apparently nothing in this house has been for me in a while," he replied. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. It filled every corner of the kitchen, pressed into the spaces between walls, drifted up the stairs and back down again. I looked at the floor, then at him, then away. He took a deep breath and nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Then he walked to the door and opened it again. "I came back for my laptop," he said. I didn't answer. He stepped out without another word. And then I heard it, the soft clunk of something being placed on the porch. I moved to the window and saw him walking to his car, the shape of his briefcase still in hand. He hadn't brought the laptop. I opened the front door slowly. On the step was a shoebox. No wrapping. No lid. Inside was the blue toothbrush. The original one. The one that started all of this. I stood there with it in my hands, stunned, the cold air pushing against my chest like a warning. The sound of his engine started, then faded down the street. When I came back inside, he was still standing in the kitchen, exactly where I'd left him. He looked at me, but said nothing. We stood that way for too long. Eventually, I placed the shoebox on the counter beside the brown bag, and I left them both there. I walked to the stairs, my legs unsteady, and slowly climbed, gripping the banister harder than I needed to. I locked myself in the bedroom. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just sat there in the dark until the lines of the windows blurred and the streetlights flickered on. Hours passed. I must have dozed, because when I came back downstairs, the lights were off and the house was silent again. No voices. No footsteps. No presence. But the bags were gone. The paper one. The shoebox. Everything. The counter was clean. The porch light was off. I walked into the living room and stopped. There on the arm of the couch sat the folded white shirt. Alone. Nothing else around it. A single note lay underneath, scribbled in careful block letters. I know whose it was. I just wanted you to know I saw it too. I sat down on the floor next to the shirt, the paper still in my hand. It wasn't a message from my husband. It wasn't a message from the man I'd let too close. It was from someone else. Someone who had been in this house longer than any of us. And someone who had come back. My son.